Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. Today we've got John Krotec. He is the founder of NeoMasculinity Solutions, NeoMasculinity.Solutions, if you want to learn more. He's written the Sentinel Handbook and many other things on critical thinking. Now, this is a great podcast for the beginning of the year, anytime really, because John and I talk about who we are as leaders, knowing ourselves, and really more about what's going on around us with our people, with our teams, and again, with ourselves. So we're going to be a great leader. We got to know who we are, what we're living for, and the direction we are going. It's a good discussion. Join in. You're going to walk away with something here that may change your life. Thanks. John, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you on. Now, you wrote the Sentinel Handbook, and what struck me is it was to rewire how we think, lead, and act in chaotic times. And I actually think we're in very chaotic times. I think America is on the precipice of not being united anymore. But we're not going to go into that realm, probably, because we don't want to be political or anything. We're talking leadership. But talk to me about this Sentinel Handbook, because a lot of what you do is not telling people what to think, but how to think so they're understanding truth and facts in an age of social media where partial truths are exploited left and right into blatant lies.
Wow. Well, you couldn't have said it any better. First of all, thank you for having me here on your show, David. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share valuable information, reliable information. And yes, we are in some very challenging times. That's kind of understated. Never before have we seen so much division and vitriol and hate and anger at each other. I've never seen it in my adult life. And, you know, what we wanted to do with the Sentinel Handbook, it's, and not to really disrespect anybody, we wrote it for an 8th grade level. And we've written it in 9 languages. And what it is, it's a primer to reignite critical thinking skills. Now, we've walked away from our intuition in many cases. We just, you know, people are getting their news off of social media, which is a mistake. But we've walked away from intuition. We've walked away from these critical thinking skills that guys like you and me who went to college ages ago actually learned how to do. And then things like logic and reason, you know, people say, you know, what's that? And then the last one, which we are trying to stoke a little bit, is common sense. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to outline the issue. Let's not even call it a problem. That's a serious issue. And then we wanted to give people a basic primer for them to be able to at least start to delve into critical thinking. Now, I'll make the statement because you asked the question, and I think it needs to be answered is why. And here's what we think. And I have a qualified team that's working on our current project, men and women who are trying to reignite this critical thinking movement again. We hear about it. We talk about it. You see the differences. You see the hate. You see the vitriol. And then nobody offers any solutions. It just seems to get worse and worse. But the future of our planet, the future of our humanity, our families, our communities, our societies is dependent on whether or not our children can discern fact from fiction, can discern fantasy from reality or reality from fantasy, or tell truth from lies. And if our children can't do that, then we're not looking toward a sustainable global community or families at the basic level. We're looking for something much different than that. And so as adults, you and me, others like us, and women too, we don't exclude women. They're just as important as the men are. We have to set the stage. And you mentioned leadership. So we have to be the leaders, and we have to create, we want to call it a legacy or a movement to reignite those skill sets which seem to have gone out the window. So I know it's a long answer to a short question, but it's a challenge for us. And so our hope is that we could, you know, if we could airdrop 100,000 copies of those over Beijing and other places of the world, imagine how we could open up the planet to be more thriving than just trying to get by surviving.
100 million copies. And so I think I am fully in line with you on this. I've had similar thoughts. I have no plans for a book on the topic, but my thought is, and I love the way you talk about for the planet versus just for America. And I do believe we need to be the role model or a role model. But what would happen in America if, starting in middle school, we started teaching kids critical thinking skills? Not what to think, but how do you process information and experiences to dig down and really understand what's the facts and what are the truth. There was actually a podcast, I was trying to look it up before we came on, and it had like the OpenAI chairman was quoting something of the NVIDIA chairman who said that facts are facts and truth is personal. And I was like, whoa, that is not correct. That's when we got a problem.
Well, that exactly. That's one reason why we have the Brainery Project. The Brainery Project, we train brains, not grains. You know, you see these silos, and we want to put brains in them. But there's the collegiate level, there's college, university, and then there's elementary school, and then there's middle school, and there's high school. So what we've been working on, AI assisted, I'm working with a company out of Ireland, is we're working to build a curriculum at all levels to do exactly what you just described. And what's interesting, based on what you just said about that fella, and I agree with you, he's wrong in his perspective, is that we in the digital age, we're getting bombarded with massive amounts of information, right? At light speed, everywhere, globally. And what we did in our deep dive and in our research, human research, not just AI assisted, is we found out that there's 6 types of information that we are being bombarded with 24/7, 365 days a year, all different, social media channels, mainstream news channels, television, all these different methodologies. And here's dispersal, dissemination systems. And here's the interesting thing, is that there's 6 forms of information: disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, which can be very dangerous, noisy information, which is social media, which is sometimes just entertainment information. And then we have AI information, which is very effective because it looks so realistic. But over here, number 6, you have reliable information. So imagine this, and listeners, please, if we're being bombarded with information and 5 forms of it, 98% of it is not reliable, how are we ever going to be effective in living our lives if all we're getting is faulty information all day long? So at a subconscious level, people are angry. I have had friends from elementary school dislike me. We've been friends forever, all through college and high school stuff and whatever, professional careers, dislike me because of something they perceive that doesn't agree with what they believe. When have you ever had what kind of friendship is that? I mean, we're seeing families and friendships being destroyed because of this onslaught of unreliable information. So to come back around to what you were saying, we would love to see that, a return to critical thinking.
So let me jump in. Let me jump in.
Yeah, sorry,
because I want to get the audience. I want you to stay on track with us here. Our listeners, is that this applies to you as a leader, no matter what you are leading. Okay, government entity, nonprofit, business, solo entrepreneur, whatever, because you're interacting with people all day long, and it is in our mutual best interest that we all are coming from a place of facts and truth. Now, there are places for opinion. Okay, I mean, if you talk about spiritual faith, and I'm very sincere about mine, but you talk about spiritual faith, at some point, you're taking it based on faith. It is an opinion. It's a conclusion. We can say we have certain facts, okay? And I believe the stuff that I follow without diving into the faith area is true. But the atheist could say the same thing, okay? Because that is a form of faith. So, but if we can have, and what you're alluding to, is we can learn how to think critically and respect differing opinions in a civil manner. You've said this several times, John. I mean, I've never seen such toxic behaviors by people. And
we can delve into faith, but there's scriptures out there, and they talk about it's not necessarily what goes into the brain, it's what comes out of the mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about the spirit can be very disconcerting to some people, right?
Yeah.
Well, the spirit is what it's all about. This universe doesn't operate without the spirit. And I, I'm trying to do a model now, how a dream catcher makes dreams, right? We're trying to figure it out. But science without the spirit and spirit without the science will not work. This universe cannot operate. And I don't know how people tear down that wall, but there's a connection with all of us. And I was holding it the other day, and this is not woo-woo, but think about this. Here's a quartz crystal that was formed on planet Earth whenever, eons ago. And in it, there's a red dot. You can't see it on your camera, but there's a red dot. And that red dot is the same element that's found in the fusion on the sun. It's iron. And it's the same element that's found in our blood. Now think about that. This is not to go into anything that just makes people uncomfortable, but let me see. We have iron in our blood. There's iron in a quartz crystal, the same elemental configuration, and there's iron on the sun. And they've even found iron in prehistoric bones, dried blood of these reptiles. Now, that's telling me, critically thinking and giving it a little bit of thought, that there's a certain connectedness to everything in the universe. And I remember in college taking a basic chemistry course, and when we learned the periodic table, all these different elements, right? But at the same time, in the same period, I took a class on all the religions of the world. Christianity, I was raised Roman Catholic. People might say something about that, but Buddha and Hinduism and Islam and what I noticed early on, I probably got this from my dad, was there's a oneness in everything. And to deny the oneness, our connectedness, when I call somebody a name and it's derogatory, I'm only saying it back to myself. If I cannot find a connection, elemental-wise or human-wise, then why am I even here? What are we doing on this planet? We're just here for ourselves?
Well, let me bring it back though as a leader. And I didn't do a good job of teeing it up, but my point is, as leaders, we've got to understand people, and we have to understand and be able to perceive, not judge, perceive, where's this person coming from? Everybody has wounds. I mean, you've been through some really tough stuff as an ex-veteran, and thank you for serving. I appreciate it. We take it so for granted that we have people like yourself who go out and fight for us to remain free. And anyway, that's a whole nother area. But
I made that choice, but I appreciate that. And there's guys and gals that have done a lot more than I have. But I did raise the right hand, but sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So I think as leaders, we need to understand everybody's got wounds. Everybody's made mistakes. Everybody's got some trauma. Everybody's got some things they haven't healed from, and where do they come in? But that affects how they process information and experiences and make decisions. And you brought up this great thing. This is a huge thing. You're bringing up the connectedness. So if we just think about that, what if you got somebody in your team brings up that topic? So how do I show them respect and support what they're thinking? And my suggestion would be, and I'm curious what your take on it is, I'm going to focus on where we can agree, and because this really doesn't affect my business, but it does affect our relationship as we work together in the business. I'm going to focus on where we can agree, and with the other stuff, I'll say, oh, that's kind of interesting. Where's your data? Where do you have some facts to back that up, or is it feelings or faith or whatever? And just have a respectful conversation. I don't have to attack them. I don't have to have a strong opinion. But why not have a dialogue that expands my knowledge? And who knows, I might get some information that might change some of my thinking. What are your thoughts on that, John?
Well, you raised some good subjects because, my foray, and you mentioned people. Remember that movie, Charlton Heston, Soylent Green is People? Remember?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Well, I just turn it around a little bit, and it's business is people, right? So when I was very young, I was in probably third, fourth grade. My dad, who was an Army officer, but not at the time he had been when we were all born, he was selling life insurance back in the early 70s. And it was the old days where you actually go to people's houses and knock on the door and you try to sell them something that's an intangible. My dad used to tell me, everybody thinks they're going to live forever. Nobody thinks they're going to die. But I got to find some things out. So I would go there as a little kid. He would drag me with him. I really didn't want to hang out with my dad visiting people that were a lot older than me. And what I found out was that, and you alluded to some of this, is that everybody has similar needs. Okay. Put that on your list. Everybody has different needs. So needs became, when I looked at human beings, and I'm a young guy, David, I'm thinking, wow, we got these needs, right? Listening matters because all these people had different needs because they were different places in life. And being around people making determinations to buy life insurance in the third grade, it doesn't seem that romantic, but I learned the foundational beliefs that helped me as I got older in life. And we'll get to it. So listening matters. Everybody has similar needs. Everybody has different needs. Listening matters. Business is people. We cannot escape it. I don't care how digital we get. Some of these younger people coming out today need to get out into the world, get off their computers, get into focus groups or something so they can actually work with real human beings, which I think is important. But the last thing, a little etiquette can go a long way.
Yeah.
Let me fast forward real quickly. We get to the next question. So when I was coming out of high school and I was in my business classes in college, and I just thought I was it, man. I was the next J. Paul Getty, right? I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And this young marketing teacher, she was probably a TA or something, but she was my instructor. One of the books that we had for that class was Amy Vanderbilt's Complete Book of Etiquette. And I'm like a 19-year-old wrestler, hungry for, getting out into the world and owning the world. What do I have to learn etiquette for, right? But we bought the book. It was required reading. And I got to tell you, sir, and your listening audience, that book, Amy Vanderbilt's Complete Book of Etiquette, helped me in more situations in my life, not only in business and professionally, but with my wife and the people who I love in the military. It's amazing. And we've heard the saying, you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. It's amazing how we can, as leaders, lower the tone and create an environment just by how much etiquette we can show each other.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you remember Good to Great, Jim Collins' book?
I don't think I read that. I had not read that.
So, but it was written a long time ago, like 20 years ago or something. And I think he and his team studied 11,000 companies. And the Good to Great standard was that you had 30 consecutive years of either income or product or profit growth. And I think it was 11,000 companies. There were only 14 companies, and they were very different. They were like Philip Morris, and then I think might have been GE, but I'm not sure, but they were very different. But every one of the 14 leaders shared one characteristic. You know what it was?
It's got to be, I don't know. There's a lot of ways we can.
It's humility. And you think, you got to be kidding me. CEOs of these huge companies like Philip Morris, are you kidding me? Humility. John Deere was one of them. They're like the John Deere CEO. One of his favorite things was to go run his tractor, okay, on his ranch or his farm or whatever. And it was humility. And when you talk about civility or etiquette, a key part is that I never read the book that you mentioned. Was that part of it? Humility as far as how you treat other people?
Absolutely. And that's a great point, because somebody always knows something more than we do. And, and we'll piggyback onto humility, open-mindedness.
Yeah.
And I can assure you, I don't care where we come from or where you come from, somebody's always going to know something more than we know. And the military was all about humility. They had a way of breaking you down, making you feel like a speck of sand, and then which is humbling, then they would build you up to become a fighting force where everybody on the team respected each other and helped each other. Because we knew that if one person faltered, the mission failed. And my quote has always been this, I don't know where it came from, the wisdom of the ages, it came from God. Polarization only works in sunglasses. It does not work in sustainable companies, relationships, organizations. I don't care, anywhere where there's people, if you're polarized, you're going to be outside the group of 14 companies, because you have to be together and respect each other.
There was a movie, a silly movie, my wife and I watched recently. It was The Prince and something. It was about a prince from Denmark who came over to what he thought would be a wild college town in Wisconsin. But there was a line from the movie that was really powerful, that he learned from the rancher father of the girl he got interested in after he was humbled a bit. And the rancher talked about how we're all interconnected. Everybody, the rancher doesn't stand by himself, okay? And the person who comes and pick up the milk from his cows doesn't stand by themselves. The milk processor doesn't stand by themselves. The trucks that take the milk to the market doesn't stand by itself, the consumer, etc. And then later in the movie, the prince uses this to negotiate with different entities in his country's cabinet or whatever to find common ground. And I was really struck how we've lost that concept in America. And I want to bring it up again. Again, this is not a political podcast, although I can talk politics all day, or religion, even if we totally disagree. It's fine. But as a company, as a leader, we've got to model this. And that's what I'm hearing you say directly or allude to over and over again. We have to model as the leader how we want our people to behave. And they've got to understand, and we have to understand as a nation, and we do need to understand globally. I don't think we need to be part of this global alliance where other countries control America, but we do need to understand how interconnected we are with others. And this isolationist style of anger and uncivility that we're seeing online and even in person now more and more is not a good thing. It's not healthy, not going to keep us together, not keep us united.
Not at all. And like you said, we could have a great conversation about so many different subjects. But, one of the things that I was with a woman, we were working with overweight kids and how to, get them on the right nutritional track and whatnot. We were sitting around talking about human behavior one time. And I don't want to digress too much, but we were talking about how there's 3 types of human galaxies, right? And perhaps the most popular human galaxy is the black hole galaxy person. And they wallow and they spin. They're a black hole. You've met black hole people before. You shake their hand, the energy's gone in the room or out of you. And they wallow in shame, blame, and guilt. They're not humble. They take no personal responsibility in anything they do. And it's always somebody else's fault. And they're guilty, whatever. So they spin and they spin and they spin. They go nowhere, right? The next, until you develop courage, this is all on a spectrum of human frequencies. Those are the lowest ones. There's a frequency and an emotion called courage. To have the courage to be humble, to say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I can try something differently. I want to find out what other people are doing. So you move into this, you develop the courage, you get out of that black hole mindset, and you move into the spiral galaxy human being. And if you look online, look it up, spiral galaxy, you'll see a center core with these arms, right? They're all over the universe. And what they do is they intersect, they're exchanging ideas, they're learning, they're absorbing knowledge. And it's just a beautiful thing at spiral galaxy. They stay away from the black holes because the black holes will suck them in and take their energy, right? They're light. They're so dense, those folks. But anyhow, so then that's the next stage. And then the last stage, which is I think where you and I are at, and you especially with podcast show, is there's the contributory galaxy human being. And you won't find that anywhere on Google A contributory galaxy is a person that has reached a state of compassion, higher consciousness. And the contributory galaxy person is one that understands this connectedness and this oneness, and they give back. Those are those 14 companies, those 1%ers of people out there that actually care about others. And they've taken their wisdom. We've all got different programs going on, and we're sharing it with the rest of the world in our hope that will improve at least one life, make one life better on planet Earth. And I agree with you. I'm not into one world government, people telling others how to live. And that's another episode. But in that journey, and I climbed mountains for 12 years, high altitude climbing. We ran trips out of Florida to the Andes, right? And it's dangerous up there. Human beings do not belong above 20,000 feet. You can die up there. But if you're prepared and if you've got the right training and the right team, you can stand on the earth, but still see the curvature of it. And that's a pretty interesting thing when you're 4,000 feet above the clouds where airliners need to be. But you're witnessing that. But here is why I mention a summit. And this is to inspire your listeners and your leaders especially, because people talk a lot, but we don't execute very much. There's the guys that talk about the summit, what they're going to do and how they're going to get there. And they never make it because they never leave the tent because there's a storm outside or whatnot. They stay inside the tent at the high camp. And then there's rare few, those contributory galaxy people that actually get up out of their down sleeping bag. They throw their energy bars in their attack pack and they put their stuff on and their crampons to go to the summit. They know they have a 15-hour day, but they get out and they do it. And it's a beautiful thing when you get to a summit and you see the sun just starting to come up, but you're up there with kindred spirits, people that have what it takes to overcome the challenges that mountain throws at you. So we were being interviewed one time, one of my climbing buddies, great guy, and they were interviewing him for some magazine, and he says, explain to us high altitude mountaineering. And it was brilliant what Steve said. He owns a honey company down in Florida with his family, but he said, mountaineering is whoever suffers the best. So me, like, I'll always take somebody's wisdom and knowledge and try to put my own slant. So life is whoever suffers the best. And it's not about wallowing in suffering. It's about developing the coping skills and being humble, which you mentioned, David, to actually work to transform our lives, to overcome the coping skills, developing those, the challenges that life throws at all of us. We've all got challenges. And if we as human beings and leaders could understand that when we look at a fellow human being and think to ourselves, they're just as challenged as I am. Wouldn't it be better to collaborate than to spew hate at each other? And that's what we need to do. But anyhow, I get inspired by guys like you because I like sharing things that are relevant and valuable to other people. That's all.
So the black hole galaxy reminds me of the drama triangle, where you have the victim who's a Teflon person, nothing sticks to them. They don't take responsibility for anything. And they are either looking for a hero who's going to take them out of it. And the hero, by the way, is not a healthy persona either. I've been the hero. I did that for many decades from a young child. I was the golden child in being raised, which was very loving and wonderful in some ways. It was an absolute disaster in others, but it was unintentional. My parents were wonderful. But the hero wants to ride in and save the day. Well, that's not healthy. Okay, that's got some flaws. We're not going to go there. And then the other one is the villain. So they want to either wait for the hero or blame the villain and everybody else the villain, and they don't have to own anything. And the villain, of course, is not a good person. So the black galaxy, very interesting. But I really love the progression that you've got in this galaxy, analogy. And then you go to the, what was the second one? It was, I don't want to say it.
It was a spiral galaxy.
Spiral. Oh, that's what I was going to say. I thought I had it wrong. So the spiral is great. So now, and it also, I want to relate it in case the audience didn't catch it, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but it relates to what you just said about that high mountaineering. Okay? In that's where the person has realized that I've got things to learn. They gain some humility. I'm going to grow. I may have been through hell. And parts of my life, particularly, I don't know what it is, this last few months in particular, I've looked back, I'm just like, oh man, I get some real pain over some past decisions that I made. It's really dumb decisions that hurt me, hurt others. Just, really, it's just, whoa. But the person is there, but they're not staying in the tent, to use your analogy, on the side of the hill. They're getting up, they're going to throw the energy bars, they're going to be grateful for each day, and they're going out and saying, okay, what do you got for me today? But as leaders, the audience, I want you to hear it. What John's talking about is that's a role model. And you were talking, John, about the team, right? If you're a leader and you're not being a role model, you got a problem with your team. But it's not a problem with the team. It's something you got to fix in yourself. If I'm hearing you correctly, you got to look at that spiral piece.
What do we do with all that knowledge and wisdom? And you know what? You raise a good point, because when I got promoted to a non-commissioned officer in the Army, you come out of the private ranks and the corporal and all this. And there were some guys that put on the sergeant stripes, and immediately they put themselves in a different category leadership-wise, probably more authoritarian than they needed to be. But I always said, as an NCO, and why we always managed to probably have more success than some of the other teams, is I would never ask a subordinate soldier to do something that I wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And I always had their backs. Yeah. And so I could ask the privates under me to do something, and they always did it. What our responsibility in commission was to make sure that they had the right tools and the right training to accomplish whatever they needed to do.
Yeah.
And so you're right. Leadership's a funny thing, and people approach it in different ways. The United States government spent a lot of money on me to go through the primary leadership development course when I was a young NCO, and we were able to learn a lot about ourselves, and it did take humility. And I'm glad you mentioned that early on, because if you were to take and separate the good NCOs from the great NCOs, I would wager that humility is probably one of the top 5 traits of those great leaders. And unless you can admit that you're wrong, and I don't think that a mistake is a bad thing unless we don't learn from it. And I'm hard-headed. I made mistakes out the yin-yang, and I'm stubborn. They used to call me, one of my drill sergeants, Sergeant Rockhead. They used to call me Rockhead because, I don't know, I was stubborn. I had a mental block or something, but it takes some people more than others. And it's not like putting your hand on a hot burner when you make these other mistakes. But if we learn from them and we can teach others about those mistakes, if I had been more humble, David, and listened to some of my earlier mentors, I could have saved myself so much trouble and so much time if I had just been humble and listened to what guys that were in that contributory state were trying to tell me.
Well, and also I think in that spiral galaxy that you bring up, am I correct in thinking that the go-to response when something goes wrong with your team, the first response is, what mistake did I make that caused my team member to fail in this way?
Exactly.
Then you build from there.
Well, everybody talks a big game about transformation until they have to go inside, right? And so it really takes courage to take a look at yourself in the mirror and go, hey, you got this, or you need to change this. And I can remember when I finally had to deal with the really not a fun event with it. In the 3rd grade, I was violated and a lot of different things happened. I was traumatized, and it's not fun for anybody, but I hid it for 40 plus years. And then I was involved in an alcohol induced or created accident, and I had a traumatic brain injury. Anyhow, let me cut to the quick. So I got into therapy. I was at insomnia for years. I got to the point to where the Prozac didn't work, made me suicidal. So I got into some therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. And about 4 months, 3 months in, my therapist, God bless her, she's an awesome person, Center Point down in Venice, Florida, Cheryl Andrews is her name. And she's just smiling at me one day. And I'm like, did I do something wrong? And she said, no, you're doing everything right. And you make me happy. And she's like, you're one of those people that actually does the homework. So the 30 plus years I have as a counselor, I know is paying off in you as a client because you're actually taking the hard steps it takes to improve your own life. And that's what I had to do. I found out all these errors in my thinking, and she's one of the biggest peoples that got me back on track, but it did take humility and it took hard work. And it's never easy to introspect. People are too scared to do it because maybe they're scared of what they might find out or come across in their past or in their current life that they're not happy with. Anyhow.
Yeah. And this concept of, there was just a podcast by Ryan Holiday, the Daily Stoic, where he was going over, it was on December 31st, Daily Stoic podcast. And he has been a friend of James Clear, who wrote Atomic Thinking.
I've read, that's on my shelf.
Yeah. And he heard Clear being interviewed at the end of 2025 by NBC or CBS or whatever on goals, how you set goals. You're like, hey, yeah. So he did a quick clip from that. And then he went back a year earlier and he did a clip on him and James Clear talking about goals. And there's a comment in there, I can't quote it specifically because I didn't prepare it for now, but in that podcast that he replays, there was a comment where I think either he or Clear says that, and I'm not saying it correctly, but the gist of it I'm getting correctly, that when you go through the super tough times, that's where you refine the gold. That's where you really can become what you want to become. That's when you really can achieve the goal you want to achieve and achieve greatness type of thing. I'm extrapolating out. They also said Clear also said something that was revolutionary. And that was that, you go achieve a goal, it's a one-time thing. But when you nail the system to achieve the goal, then you can repeat it over and over and win again and again and again and again. The system is more important than the goal.
So I couldn't agree with them more, and systems are what we live, that earth behind me spinning because of a system that's in place, right?
Yeah.
There's two ingredients, I believe, that we need to have to create that system. And a lot of people have a hard time doing this. And this has nothing to do with arrogance or cockiness or narcissism. And I learned this in my therapy because I had never done it before. Self-love and self-forgiveness.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to forgive myself to the mistakes that I had made in my life. But even more so, it took me a while to appreciate and love who I am. And it took months to figure that out. And it started out slow, and then it crescendoed into something really kind of cool. And, it really boils down to everybody has value. And you have to figure out what your value is. Nobody's going to do it for you. You're not going to find your value through other people. You're only going to find it through yourself. And it took me months and months and months of going in when I had insomnia, looking at myself in the mirror and going up and going, hey, dude, I love you. You are a great guy. Talking to myself in the mirror, I'm looking around to see if anybody's watching me. And what it started to do was to reprogram a sense of self-love. Love is like etiquette. Proper love, and I'm not talking about the creepy kind of love that we see so many people involved in, with just strange stuff. We're not going to go there. But the love that emanates from somewhere deep in your soul, your heart, that kind of love for each other. If we had more of that, wow, what could we accomplish on planet Earth?
Well, yeah, and I think, so Danny Silk taught me years ago in one of his courses, not personally, there's two major emotions in life. My audience has heard this many times, but what do you think they are?
Well, I don't know, love and hate, something along those lines.
You're very close. Love and fear. Hate comes from fear. Okay? Anger, depression, anxiety comes from fear. So Danny Silk taught that. And I think as leaders, fathers, spouses, we need to really come from a place of love and not let fear take over. Fear yells, it screams, it pressures, it threatens. And so it can kind of attempt to crowd out what you're talking about, that we cannot focus on the bad in us or the mistakes that we've made, things, particularly things in the past that we cannot change. But we can learn from them and then leave them in the past and reach forward. But we have to do that in love. You look at the good things of love, whether you're looking at the fruit of the Spirit or, it's just kindness, gentle. So I have done sales for over 50 years, off and on, and I've been successful at it. I've never been trained. I mean, barely, but I've been successful.
I know why. I already know why.
Why?
Because you're authentic.
Yeah, because I sincerely like people.
Yeah, you're authentic.
And I just like
it's that simple.
Yeah. So as leaders, if you don't like your people, you need to do what John was just talking about. You were talking about a moment ago, John. You need to look at yourself in the mirror and say, okay, what do I got to do with myself? Because this is not healthy. This is not the way my legacy, this is not what I want my legacy to be. I mean, there's good in everybody. And if you're not in a good place or a good group, it's not a good position. It doesn't align with your skills, your passions, whatever it might be, or it's the wrong type of people. You can switch that. But if they're reasonably good people and you don't like them, it's going to be really hard to be a good leader.
Absolutely is. If you don't care about exactly, it's caring and compassion. But I remember that's baseline stuff. And if we can get the foundation, if we can build that foundation, and there's scriptures for that, but if we can build that foundation with something concrete, then it'll last forever. I remember when I jumped out of an airplane the first time, right? Trying to get this right. He said, if you're not scared, then jump. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. If you're not scared, then jump. It's kind of like if you're scared, then don't jump, and you're not going to have that experience. So, you jump. And in life, we have to get to, it's like going up to a swimming pool and we don't know what the temperature is, right? Everybody's hanging out, wondering if it's hot, if it's cold, and they're not swimming. They're not having a good time. Then you got this crazy person that comes in and just cannonballs right in the deep end. And he's having a blast. He's in the pool. He doesn't care if it's cold or hot. He just wants to swim. Yeah. So if you want to live, you got to jump into deep end. Yeah. But you have to have a faith and a confidence in yourself that you're doing it with great integrity. And imagine if we could just be a child again. When a child's born, that they haven't been through life yet. They haven't developed things like hate, resentment, and all these things that adults grow into. They're inquisitive, they're curious. And then, which how I was until I got raped on an overnight, right? And then I was an adult very quickly. I didn't trust anybody. I was angry. In high school, I rebelled, drank a lot of beer. In my fraternity, I was like living life on the edge. I didn't really kind of understand it, trying to prove my manhood and all this crazy stuff. And what I needed to do is I needed to forgive myself and love who I was. And so, life is a bunch of series of events and how we cope and how we react to them. And you're totally right, man. Fear will stifle you every time.
Yeah. And I remember when I moved I lived in Marin County for many years, decades, just north of San Francisco. And I lived in Larkspur, moved up the road about 20 minutes to Novato at the top of Marin County. And I was going to coach a youth soccer team. It was an under-9 team. It was my oldest child at the time, many years ago. He's now 40. This year he'll be 43. So, but I met with Bob Capus. He was the registrar. And I had done a year or two or three, I don't know what it was, some coaching previously. But he said to me, hey, Dave, I want to give you a piece of advice. when you have kids that are acting out, they're a problem on your team. I want you to remember that the problem's not the kid. They got problems at home. So give them some grace. Be patient with them. And we as leaders, many of us in leadership, we have one or more people on the team where it's like adult daycare. These people don't meet our expectations. They fail when we think they should succeed. There's a reason for that. It may be we didn't provide them the system they needed to fully learn something and do it correctly. It may be they've got a problem at home right now. It may be something decades earlier like happened in your life that's some trauma that's unresolved. And if we can show them some appropriate, healthy love as a brother, as a friend, as a leader, you think about it, John, I don't know about you, but I go back to high school, even grade school, Mr. Phillips, who was in charge of PE in middle school. Mr. Phillips was awesome. He was hard as nails, but he was awesome. I have some coaches that were just like, they were instrumental in my life because they were such positive role models. Tough guys, but nice.
Well, you raise a really good point. And it's something that we need to talk about because it's called mentoring.
Yeah.
And in all my wildest days, I seem to always have, whether it was a male role model, mentor, older always, for sure, or a female that would always pull me in. And I don't know if they could read that I was a decent person, just not acting out, but Coach Rapolsky in high school, saw us kidding around and goofing around. And anyhow, long story, but you're right. We can be mentors where we learn from our mistakes and help others. But there was always a mentor who was there to help me in some of my darkest days. And at the time, you don't think about it. Rapolsky was hard as nails too, but there's reports and we saw you're drinking at the football games. Here we are in high school. Let's nip it in the bud now. Or Mr. Crampton in class, American history, 11th grade, skipping school like a drunken sailor, pulled me in. He said, man, you're not going to graduate from high school if you don't get your grades up. But you're 110% right. We need to be grateful for the mentors we had, and we need to take those mentoring moments and share with others. Your podcast is like a huge mentoring moment. There it is. Manage to win. Mentor to win. We could have so many different things, but it's true.
Oh, no,
I believe that.
I agree. Yeah, no, the teens today have it tougher than it's ever been before, and they are responding, many of them, negatively. I mean, I could go through different instances in our neighborhood. We live in a nice area, but it's an area where too many kids have these electric scooters and bikes, and it's like, and then they want to ride them on the sidewalk. Where I'm walking with my wife, I'm just like, so we had this kid coming up the hill on a scooter on the sidewalk. Another guy was with him on another scooter, and he was on the road nearby, which was fine. And so this kid wasn't going off the sidewalk. So I just stood and I said, you got to get off. And he kind of slowed down, gave me a dirty look. And I said, can't ride those on the sidewalk. That's for walking. And then as he went off, he cussed me out. I'm like, hey, you want to come back here and say that? Then he flipped me off.
And then he kept going right at a high.
Yeah. No, and I'm not going to do anything to a high school kid. I mean, that'd be ridiculous. But that never would have happened in my day.
We talked about that same subject, my wife and me, how kids will mouth off to police officers and teachers and clerks at stores and people behind the counter at a fast food restaurant. And this is a great lead into neo-masculinity, because if you look up, and this gets into toxic masculinity, the narrative of toxic masculinity, and when we did the deep dive. But when we looked up, we were wondering why are we always hearing masculinity with the word toxic? It started, 4 or 5 years ago, right? And so we looked up neo-masculinity, and the name of our company, our one project is NeoMasculinity.Solutions. That's important, solutions. And what we found out was neo-masculinity, that the concept or the definition on Google is a man cannot be masculine unless he accepts, quote unquote, changing social norms. So, okay, sounds good on face, right?
No,
Men But here's what happens if the changing social norm is not based on facts or the truth? You're telling men we have to lie in order to be masculine. So let's just take it to the next step, though. Why would we want to create this narrative of toxic masculinity, right? Because historically, the vintage gender role of a male is to protect his family and to protect his loved ones from threats. That's a man's primary mission in life, nothing else. We did the research, look it up. We're not talking about gender identities. A woman can be a neo-masculine woman. If she's a single mom and she has to protect her children from a threat, that's a traditional male role. So we dove deep. We started looking at vintage gender roles. We started figuring it all out. Well, think about that, David. If we can disempower or emasculate a man, take him off of his primary purpose in life, then we have a good opportunity to manipulate his family or him and the people around him. Listen, we are not exclusive of women and femininity. It's part of the whole model. You can't have a human population without women. That's just ridiculous. But what we need is more men fulfilling, you talked about leaders, but we need more men to fulfill their vintage gender role. Wake up, ask questions, get back on your primary purpose, protect your family from these information threats that are destroying your family.
Oh, yeah.
And that's another thing of we don't exclude women. We want men to embrace their gender role. I don't care how they identify. It doesn't matter to me. That's something completely different. We want you to just fulfill your role. So if you're a parent and you bring children into this life, what is your role? You have to protect your family. And if your family's being bombarded with unreliable information, then buy yourself a Sentinel Handbook and give it to them. Buy the Brain Freeze mini course, Breaking the Ice on Critical Thinking, and sit your children down and watch it with them. Fulfill your role as a parent. And that's why you get guys coming up the sidewalk with guys like you and their wife who understand etiquette. I would have never dreamt of flipping off an older guy if he told me to get off the sidewalk. I would have been a nanosecond, because if my dad would have found out, there would have been a repercussion, and it wasn't fun to go see the colonel.
You also don't flip off a guy who's twice your size. So, it just doesn't make sense. But I think you bring up something really well. It's powerful that as leaders, we need to step up and be the leader, man or woman. But there's a natural, it's separate of spiritual considerations, faith consideration. There's a natural, just look at nature. Okay, the man has certain attributes that need to contribute to the family. The woman has certain attributes that need to contribute to the family. And you bring up protecting the family. Well, one thing is critical thinking, and that's super important. Another thing, which quite frankly, I was really good with my biological, I was married for 40 years and then divorced. I won't talk about it more, but my three biological kids, fine. I was that dad, protective, boom, boom. When the adopted kids came along, we adopted a total of 5. First one was more like guardianship. Good kid, but was dedicated to his biological family. And then a sibling group of 4, and they struggled. And I was too much of a wimpy dad because I was trying to make the marriage work and I was letting some rules go by.
Slide, yeah.
So one of the things that I failed in, that I just encourage parents and leaders, because this applies in leadership roles also, is not limiting the social media as it grew and grew. And I think TV time, we're pretty good, but the social media phones, when they really started to come out 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, didn't limit that enough. And so part of it is the critical thinking. That's super important. Life skill, got to have it. Part of it is also, okay, where can I unplug? Where can I control? Your kids don't need a phone. Can you set an example? Remember, as a leader, can you set an example that I have certain time where you don't interrupt me because I have to work on stuff and focus? As a parent, can I set an example with my kids. There's certain time where our phones are going to be off. And I said, our phones, not your phones. So I'm going to turn off my phone as well as you turn off yours. Might be 2 hours. Might be the entire evening. Might be, I got one guy, he does our HVAC system, great guy. With his kids, it's like, okay, 10 o'clock bedtime, everybody's phones come out here in the kitchen. Turn in your phones. They're all off for the evening. So he knows his kids aren't on phones overnight.
That's nice. Yeah, when we actually look at information that's in social media primarily, it's a cesspool of unreliable information.
No.
And another reason why what this unreliable information does is it spikes your dopamine. This is all proven by science. This isn't John Krotec making this up. And so without giving it away, go online, look up dopamine and see what too much dopamine does to you. It can even create schizophrenia. It can create a schizophrenic reaction, anger, and all the things we talk about, what we'd like to see less of. But what it does is it puts us in a constant fight or flight fear state. So these kids that are acting out, and it's great that you mentioned mentorship, and we're talking about being aware that there might be something else going on. They're only acting out because they're spending an inordinate amount of time on electronics. And they're moving from those dopamine spikes that everybody wants, and it triggers them into fear states. Yeah. And this experiment of the online, the World Wide Web has a dark downside to humanity, and it's not sustainable. I would venture to say here on your show, David, that social media companies will look a lot different 2 years from now. Because I think more and more people, because of guys like you that give guys like me opportunities to talk about such things, you're hearing more and more of it. It's not healthy to be in a dopamine-induced trigger state all the time. And when you have like your best friend from grade school get angry and want to disown you, and the guy spends a lot of time online, there's a reason for it. It's not rocket science. It's called intuition or critical thinking or logic, A plus B equals C. Yeah. And so we got a lot of work to do. But I feel like we're on the tip of the spear now with again, not to butter your bread, but guys like you and shows like this, and that we can continue to spread good, reliable information straight from our hearts because we love people. We want to help them. We're winning. And the reason why I know we're winning because the numbers of people online at times seem to be dropping. I see people that were big time online not too long ago that the people are leaving. They're leaving it. You can only be angry so much.
Well, I think it's great if people will wake up, because we are seeing it on both the far right, far left, where the anger and the vitriol and don't bother me with facts. People who call themselves Christians and you say, well, what does the Lord say about that? And they're like, whoa, don't get spiritual on me. Well, wait a minute, I thought that was your faith. And, it's like, and they're locked in. And then you've got the conspiracy theory folks, the people that build it. Who is it? Candace Owens or something like that?
She has really gone off the graph.
Oh, I mean, she's just like, whoa. I mean, I was listening to her, I'm just like, I don't hear anything factual here. This is all just ultra bizarre. And so anyway, and I don't mean to pick on her. She's not alone, unfortunately. But they're getting all these views. And it's like crazy. So I think getting back to your Sentinel Handbook, teaching critical thinking, as we move to a close here, do you have a good before-after example yourself or somebody you've worked with where this is how they handled a situation where their critical thinking skills were not very strong or non-existent, and then after they learned the teachings that you've got going on, whether it's Sentinel Handbook or one of your other programs, they ran into another situation and here's how they handled it. And here's how it went differently. I should have prepped you for this one.
No. I can't think of anything specific, but I have had people private message me and say thank you because your information is credible and it's helped me. And anytime we can give due diligence, remember like we roll into college course and we'd see, oh, there's a term paper in that course. Term paper meant you actually had to do something. And I've had people I would just say the stories of behind the scenes of thank yous that we've gotten from some of the information that we've been able to disseminate out there. It's just the thank yous, not anything specific, but when we do critically think and we do use logic and reason in our decision-making process, how can we not be thankful? And think about that. So my dad said one time, and this is a good thing, and take the human spectrum, the human community, put it on a linear line, visualize a line of people. And on one end, you got the ultra-right, those conspiracy theorists. And on the other end, you got the ultra-leftists. And 1% and 1%. Then there's 98% of the population in the middle. Some of us are more I'm conservative in a lot of things, but I'm also liberal in some things. We fall on this spectrum. There's never any label to put on it. Because when we label somebody, it changes it changes the game. And you can't heal with labeling people. So, but the 1% and the 1% always has 98% of it is each other's necks. We need to just tune out.
Yeah.
Turn them off. Why are we listening to people that we call the anger litmus test? If you turn a story on or you look at a meme or you watch a reel and you're angry within 15 seconds, I can assure you, medically, biologically, spiritually, it is not healthy. So when you look at something, give yourself a personal anger litmus test. Remember that, little papers and all that? If you're angry in 15 seconds, it's not good for you. It just isn't. And the more and more we can tune that stuff out and listen to good stuff that's informative and factual and truthful, the better off we're going to be. But it starts with you. Don't worry about your next door neighbor. Worry about what you do. And then that way, you only have yourself to hold accountable and nobody else.
Yeah, I don't listen to any mainstream media. My homepage on my browser is World News and Reports, which is a Christian organization. But they do have that perspective. I was told years ago by a lobbyist. He said, you got to understand every media has a bias. So what I love about World News and Reports is they report on the facts. Then they do have opinion columns, but they're labeled opinion columns. But in their articles, it's just factual. Here's what happened. And they report on some things that I wouldn't hear about otherwise. And then each morning I get a newsletter, I think it's up to like 4 million subscribers now, called 1440. Now
I haven't heard of that.
They pick and choose what they want to summarize and report on, but it gives me some major news highlights. And then they do include some little snippets at the end that are more minor things, and once a week or twice a week, they include good stories. So it's not all bad stuff. Here's some human interest stories. So I kind of like that. It's okay. It doesn't get me upset, but I don't tune in on any of the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, I love that because, all these stories are engineered to elicit a response or reaction anyway. Mm-hmm. So just do yourself a favor. If you're getting all your news from CNN, you're not hearing the whole story. If you're getting it all from Fox, you're not hearing the whole story.
Exactly.
And if you go online, there's a chart somewhere, David, where that shows you the bias. If you stick to those ones in the middle, we get both sides. Chances are your anger state is going to be lessened. But Cal Ripken in his book, Deep Work, I don't know if you've read that.
No, I haven't.
Cal Newport, not Cal Ripken. I'm thinking of Cal Newport, Deep Work, or Jerome Lanier, You're Not a Gadget. These are important books written by people that have been all up in the digital space. Jerome Lanier created virtual reality, and he's telling you, limit your time because it's engineered to manipulate you. Who wants to be manipulated? David, don't lie to me, man. Just tell me the truth. If I'm a jerk, let me know.
Oh, yeah. So I'm with you. So, all right, well, let's, John, we could keep going all day. So, and I want to talk to you a moment after this about something else, but closing thoughts, I do recommend our audience check out the Sentinel Handbook, check out what John's doing. What's the best website for them to go to learn what you're doing, John?
Well, they can go to NeoMasculinity Solutions.
Okay.
Okay. Or they can go to my personal website. We didn't even get into poetry and what that means, but johntkrotec.com. We got a lot of neat information on there. Just sign up for the newsletter. We have a freebie for men and women on the NeoMasculinity site. 10 things that you can do right now to change your life and make your life better, the lives of those around you. We're on a mission. It's an inclusive mission. And our whole goal is to protect our families from threats. That's it.
Yeah.
So you can connect with me there. And then we're reworking a lot of the published titles that I've got out there, but I've got half a dozen books, but we're reworking all of them and how poetry connects into what I've done. But anyhow, it's really about you and the listeners. It's about the listeners for taking the time out of their day to listen to your show. God bless you and thank you. And it's about you for having the courage to get on here and let guys like me share some interesting subjects. And so without your audience and without podcast shows like yours, David, guys like me just, we wallow in the mire. And thank you for bringing me out of the mire. So I appreciate and I'm grateful.
No, I appreciate what you're doing. And I hope you make some serious headway on the critical thinking space. You're not alone, but you're doing some unique things. I appreciate your background. And thank you for being on the show. And thanks to the audience.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you.